I told my wife that my life would be better without her. She went nuclear, so I responded in kind. It's been a wild couple of weeks, to say the least, and I figured it was time for an update. My previous post must have given some of you a hint of what I've been going through, but things have gotten much messier since then. Here's the whole story, unfiltered and a bit more detailed, for those who want to know how my marriage with and my wife of 5 years came crashing down. And I used to be happy, at least I thought we were. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party about 8 years ago, and there was this instant connection. She was charming, confident, and had this way of making you feel like you were the center of her world. That's how she made me feel at first. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. We dated for a couple of years, and eventually I asked her to marry me. But things changed after we got married. Little by little, Anne's quirks started to shift into something more grating. At first, it was just small things, harmless I thought. She had a way of nitpicking everything I did, from how I loaded the dishwasher to how I folded my clothes. I figured that's just how she was, and that it wasn't a big deal. We all have our idiosyncrasies, right? But then it got worse, and would question every decision I made, even the most trivial ones like what I chose to eat for breakfast. I remember one time I made myself a simple scrambled egg breakfast, and then launched into a lecture about how eating eggs every morning could raise my cholesterol, as if I hadn't already heard that 1,000 times before. She insisted I eat my meals in a certain order for better digestion because of some TikTok she'd watched about pH balance. Another time, she got upset because I didn't wash my feet right after getting home. And the arguments over these things? They were explosive, and had this way of escalating every little disagreement into a full-blown war. It wasn't long before I realized that she seemed to get the most confrontational when I was particularly happy or particularly stressed. If I came home in a good mood, having had a great day at work, she'd find some way to pick a fight with me. If I came home exhausted, needing a little space, she'd start an argument about how I wasn't giving her enough attention. It felt like I was walking on eggshells all the time, trying to manage my own emotions just to avoid triggering one of her outbursts. 2 weeks ago, Anne and I had a blowout fight that became the tipping point. It started over something as stupid as me coming home and wanting to relax on the couch for a bit before eating dinner. She wanted me to join her at the table immediately, and when I said I'd join her in 10 minutes, she went off. She accused me of being inconsiderate, lazy, and ungrateful for the dinner she'd made. I snapped, and before I knew it, I'd blurted out the words that had been building up inside me for years. You know, my life would probably be better without you. Anne's face went white, then red, and she stormed out of the house, screaming that she was going to stay with her parents until I got my act together and apologized. I didn't try to stop her. At that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care whether she stayed or left. I was just so tired of the constant fights, the relentless criticism, the feeling that I could never do anything right. She left that night, and then the texts started pouring in, and sent me message after message, demanding an apology, insisting that I had crossed a line, calling me selfish and accusing me of taking her for granted. At first, I tried to respond, to de-escalate the situation, but she wasn't having it. Nothing I said was enough for her, so I stopped replying. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. It was like a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and suddenly I could breathe again. I didn't have to argue with her about why it was perfectly fine to eat my burger before my fries. I didn't have to justify why I wanted to go for a run instead of doing yoga with her in the morning. I didn't have to listen to her constant nitpicking about every little thing. It felt like I could actually live in my own home again. A few days later, still in the quiet aftermath of Anne's departure, I found myself thinking about her ex. Let's call him Mark. I knew that and had been married once before, and she'd always spoken about him in a pretty dismissive way. Claimed he couldn't handle her strong personality and that he was just too passive. I'd always assumed the divorce was mostly his fault, but after everything I'd been through, I started to wonder if maybe there was more to the story. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I looked him up on social media and reached out. It took all of a few hours for him to respond, and he seemed almost relieved to hear from me. We met up at a local bar the next evening, and as soon as we started talking, it became clear that he'd been holding on to his own frustrations for years. Mark and I swapped stories, and it was eerie how similar our experiences were. He told me how and had always been quick to anger, how she'd nitpick every little thing, and how she seemed to thrive on conflict. He told me that his divorce from her wasn't about a single event or even a few bad fights. It was about a long, drawn-out realization that she had a fundamentally toxic way of relating to her partners. After a while, you just feel drained, Mark said, taking a swig of his beer. It's like she's constantly chipping away at your sense of self until you don't even know who you are anymore. I got out because I realized that I couldn't stand being around her. She made me hate my own life. I nodded, feeling a pang of recognition. I wasn't sure if it made me feel better or worse to know that someone else had gone through the same thing. Part of me wanted to believe that and could change, that the problems were just a result of the stress we'd both been under. But hearing Mark's story, I realized that maybe this was just who and was someone who needed control, who needed to be right, even if it meant tearing down the people closest to her. While and was still at her parents' house, I decided to consult with a lawyer. I didn't want to jump straight to divorce, but I needed to know what my options were. The lawyer I spoke to was blunt but professional. After I laid out the details of my marriage, he told me that because and was able-bodied, educated, and perfectly capable of supporting herself, the chances of me having to pay any sort of alimony were slim. There's really not much she can take from you, assuming the assets are split fairly, he told me. As long as you're reasonable in the negotiations, there's no reason this needs to get ugly. It was a relief to hear that, but it also made me realize how serious I'd become about the idea of ending my marriage. Up until that point, it had just been an abstract thought, something I'd entertained in moments of frustration. But now, with the legalities laid out in front of me, it felt like a real possibility. A part of me even felt guilty for how much that idea excited me. The thought of starting over, of finding a version of myself that didn't revolve around Anne's moods. After visiting the lawyer, I called and it had been nearly 2 weeks since she'd left, and I was ready to have an honest conversation with her. She picked up almost immediately, her tone full of expectation. "It's about time you called," she said like she was expecting me to grovel. "Have you finally come to your senses?" I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would change everything. "And I think we should get a divorce." There was a beat of silence on the other end, then a burst of angry laughter. "You think you can just leave me? After everything we've been through? Do you really think you'll do better without me?" "I don't think it," I replied. "I know it. I've realized that I've been miserable for a long time, and I don't want to be miserable anymore." She switched tactics, her voice turning cold. "Fine then, but if you think I'm walking away with nothing, you're delusional. I'll take everything from you." I let out a sigh, trying to keep my tone even. "You can try, but any further contact should be through my lawyer. I'm done with the threats." She hung up on me, but I didn't feel the rush of fear I'd expected. Instead, I felt calm, like I'd taken the first step out of a dark tunnel. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what life could look like without her, without the constant fights, the bitterness, the feeling of being trapped in a life that I no longer recognized. Since that phone call, I've started making plans for what comes next. I've been packing up my things, sorting through the remnants of our life together, and it's been a strange mix of catharsis and sorrow. There's a part of me that still remembers and I first fell in love with, the woman who made me feel like I was the luckiest guy in the world. But that hasn't existed in a long time. I'm not naive enough to think that the divorce process will be smooth. I know and well enough to expect that she'll try to take more than her fair share, to push for a fight. But I'm prepared for it. I've already told my lawyer that I'm willing to give her a little extra in the settlement, 55/45, maybe even 60/40, just to avoid a prolonged battle. If I can convince her that she's winning, I think she'll go for it. She always has to feel like she's one step ahead. And honestly, I don't care about the money. I just want my life back. Looking back, I realize how long I let myself stay in a situation that made me unhappy. I kept telling myself that things would get better, that we could work through it. But the truth is I was afraid. I was afraid of being alone, afraid of starting over, afraid of what people would think. But now that I've taken the first step, I feel a kind of hope that I haven't felt in years. There's still a long road ahead, and I'm not pretending that it'll be easy. But for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to the future. I'm looking forward to rediscovering who I am, to finding peace without Anne's shadow looming over me. So, Reddit, I guess I'll leave you with this. I know some of you might think I'm an asshole for the way I handle things. But after years of walking on eggshells, I think I deserve a chance at happiness. Maybe I didn't handle everything perfectly, but I'm finally doing what I should have done a long time ago, putting myself first.